All right, our next quick take will be with John Fela. John Fela is the Ministry Relations Manager at Johnny and Friends Chicago, working with churches to equip and train them to help the disabled in their communities. Previous to that, he spent almost 20 years in education, working with children from infants to middle school, serving in a variety of roles, including teacher, mentor, teacher, and school director. John lives in Round Lake, Illinois, and is a single father to his son, Christopher. He is a public speaker, multiple podcast guest, and regularly contributes to Key Ministries' Special Needs Family blog, as well as other special needs blogs, including Hope Anew and The Mighty. Join me in welcoming John.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. It's great to be back at Disability in the Church, this time in sunny Orlando. My presentation today is on the power of community. And I want to begin my presentation by telling you a story. And it's a true story that happened to me, and it's called A Tale of Two Parking Lots, which, as you can imagine, do in fact involve two parking lots. And the first part of this story happened over 10 years ago. It was the summer of 2012. I was sitting in a parking lot outside of the church that we attended at the time. It was a Friday evening, and I was waiting to go into a men's group that always met on Fridays, but I was there early, so I decided to sit in my car and make two phone calls. I made one phone call to my roommate from college and another phone call to my best friend from high school. Both were married with no kids. And I was calling them because at the time, I was experiencing the worst season of my life. We were frustrated with what to do in terms of our own son with autism, as far as supporting him, getting him the right school placement, wrestling with insurance and therapies. I had a job loss, so we were suffering from severe financial distress and almost losing our home, and our marriage was hanging by a thread. So I did naturally what anyone would do, and I called my friends for help. And as I reached out to them, they told me, you know, this is a really challenging time for you, and we're here for you, but we don't know how to help you. In fact, my friend from high school even said, this sounds really crazy to me, and if I were you, I would just leave. And I told him I can't do that. So from there, I went into the men's meeting, and I thought that I would be getting some sage wisdom and advice from guys that were mostly 20 years my senior. And as I told that story again, essentially that evening, there was stunned silence until finally the group leader chimed in and said, wow, that's pretty rough. But what you need to hear is that it's going to be okay. If you've ever been in a real crisis, you know that's the worst thing you can tell a person. As much as we know in the end it is all going to be okay, that's not what I needed. I needed support. I needed help. I needed brothers to come walk beside me. And at that moment I realized I had no community. So I had to go find me some community. But I didn't know what exactly that meant for me, especially being a special needs parent. I had to ask myself hard questions like, what does community look like for me? Where do I even find it for someone in my situation? Who could I even connect with? And ultimately, how do I start? Well, as I talk about my journey in finding and developing intentional community, I'm using the visual of a tree here, which is easy enough for us to understand. And of course, I started with the seeds and the roots, planting seeds and laying down roots in terms of building and developing community. In terms of finding good community, better community, the first step that we actually took, which might not be a surprise, was we found a better church. And understanding that even though our son had severe autism, and understanding that it would be great to always have a church that has a established disability ministry. In our case, we found a great church that while they didn't have a disability ministry, they still loved our family. And that really made all the difference to us, and for most families, I think, that we serve in ministry. And so we found that there was a natural community with a good church. People that cared about us, were interested in our life, and also wanted to walk beside us. But during the time we spent at this particular church for several years, we got involved with the church in many different ways. Not only ways that helped us to build and develop community, but actually specifically taught me certain tools, gave me certain tools and giftings and experience that I would then later use to build and develop better, more intentional community down the road. So we had all kind of opportunities for connecting, like serving and volunteering in the church. I did that with a variety of fundraisers and men's ministries and special events. Of course, getting plugged into things like small groups and Bible studies. And I can tell you that While we attended a small group at that church that wasn't for parents of disability, we were still very loved by those folks. And many families that I talk to want that natural, normal experience. They sometimes want to be with families that are just, walking a different path than them. And of course, that experience led later on to actually doing a specific special needs small group at a different church for us. Social events geared for the family and development of leadership skills, again, through these special events and different ministries in the church and special projects. Those all gave me valuable experience that I later then used and applied in other places. But then as the tree grows, we have branches and leaves, and of course, what does that look like? Well, eventually we left that really good church, but then we did things at other churches, again, starting small groups for families of disability there. I started a dad's support group for special needs dads in my community that still meets in person today. And I got connected with a ton of resources around the country with different disability ministries, getting plugged in with them and not only getting resources from them, but then also starting to give back in different ways in terms of sharing my own experience as a dad, writing and speaking and all of these other things. And what that allowed me to do was to not only use tools that I got from these other experiences in new ways, but it also then allowed me to gain resources and gain experience that I could then use for my own family and then bless others. So the advice I always give families or parents in these situations is, where community does not exist, try to make it yourself. It's easy to find a church with, let's say, an established disability ministry where you can just plug yourself in, or in your community finding those resources disability-wide. So what I often suggest to folks is, first of all, seek out established groups and networks in your community. Find those things, and usually this is something that you could find, let's say, through social media or virtually. Many times there's a lot of great groups on Facebook, things that either meet virtually or maybe in person. And there's also lots of great ministries that do virtual meetups now, and a lot of them are represented here this week. So there are established things out there you can plug into. But if you're looking to do something yourself in your own community, whether that's in person, virtually, or maybe both, begin small and intentional. Engage the people you know. Find those families that are in your own community, whether it's your neighbors, families from the local school that your kids might attend, your church, and connect with them and see how you might be able to resource together and pool and share those resources. Again, lean into technology and social media, which we all need and use, but honor the in-person connections. My dad's group that started meeting in person years ago before COVID, once COVID hit, of course, we went virtual, but the fascinating thing is that coming out of that COVID time frame and coming out of virtual into in-person again, I probably had the most response in terms of new dads coming because they were hungry for something in person instead of virtual for a change, and that really made a difference for us. Bring value to your relationships. Remember, it's also about what you can bring to the table in terms of sharing resources you found or that you're connected to. I'm always throwing the question out in terms of people that I meet and support, or when I have these kind of conversations. You always want to be asking, how can I help you? What can I bring to this relationship or this connection that might bring value to your situation, or maybe to a group that you work with or represent? And lastly, use your gifts and talents. If you have a passion for something, see how that might help you to develop new relationships or new connections. It may or may not be disability related, but if you find others in that community that you can partner with that maybe have a similar interest or skill, then maybe that's something that helps you to not only build community, but also some intentional friendships along the way. And finally, what's the fruit? Well, I'm excited to say that the fruit are the many relationships that I've built and developed over the years. I've been blessed to be part of this disability community now for several years. These are photos of just a few of the friendships I've made, and what's amazing is that all these friendships have connections on more than one level. Folks that I've met in ministry, but some of those relationships that have blossomed into either deeper friendships or connections with other ministries or other work that I've done. And I could say a lot about these folks here, especially the guy in the middle. That was not intentional, by the way, but at any rate, these are people that have brought value to my life, and hopefully I have brought value to theirs in terms of supporting their work and sharing their work and understanding that community is not necessarily the people you see all the time. It's the people you have the most connection with, and distance does not have to stand in your way. Relationships like the guy I started my dad's group with years ago, his son is on the right and my son is on the left. We've become friends to the point where his son actually asks about wanting to see my son and wanting to hang out with us in some different social ways, which really kind of demonstrates when these deep relationships take root, you know, the kind of fruit that can develop not just between parents, but also between your kids. And of course, groups like our beloved Special Fathers Network, which there's even another guy in this audience who's in this picture too. And this is a group of dads nationally that meets up. So again, there's intentional connections that are local, but also dads from around the country that meet up during the year and also connect with virtually. A great example of what can happen when you find that commonality and you don't let things restrict how well a relationship can grow and develop. I'm going to close out my story, my second part of that parking lot story, by telling you the part that happened about 5 years ago in November of 2019. It was Black Friday, and the day before Thanksgiving, and I was sitting in my car in a parking lot at a local shopping center. I was not there to get the latest deal because of the holiday shopping. I was there because not only maybe 20 minutes before, my then wife handed me with divorce papers out of the blue. The difference between me sitting in that parking lot then as opposed to 10 years before was that now, as I sat in that parking lot to kind of catch my breath and grasp what was going on, I now had a ton of people I could call. I had special needs parents, I had dads, I had divorced parents, I had folks that had a ton of resources for me that I could lean into. I wasn't alone anymore because I had intentionally and genuinely developed friendships and relationships that I had given myself to and fed into and were there for me when I needed them, again, in a point of true crisis. If you'd like to know more about me or my story, you can plug me into the Google machine, as I like to say. I do have a website and a variety of social media handles. Thank you, folks, very much.